The white rose was innocent. The red roses were dangerous. And the chamomile hidden in her bag could get someone killed. For 3 years, Elena Marsh has belonged to Dominic Cross, the most powerful man in South Boston. But when he discovers flowers from 3 different men, his jealousy turns deadly. Now Elena must decide whether to keep running from her past, or finally fight back. The air in the office still carried the fading bite of cigar smoke, the kind that clung to the velvet curtains and the leather chairs long after the flame had gone out. On the vintage turntable in the corner, a Billie Holiday record had been spinning through its final track, the needle crackling soft against the vinyl. Then, mid-note, the music stopped. The abrupt silence was worse than the song. Elena Marsh stood just inside the doorway, her hand still resting on the brass handle. She had been in this office 100 times. She knew every inch of it, the mahogany desk that could double as a conference table, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the South Boston waterfront, the bookshelves lined with first editions that Dominic Cross had never once opened. But today, the room felt different. Smaller. The air pressed against her skin. "Who gave you those flowers?" Dominic's voice came from behind the desk, low and even, the way the tide sounds right before a storm rolls in. He wasn't looking at her face. His eyes were fixed on the white rose pinned to the lapel of her blazer, the single stem she had tucked there without thinking an hour ago. His cigar lay dead in the ashtray, a thin thread of smoke still curling upward like a warning. Elena's throat tightened. "It's just a rose." "That's not what I asked." He rose from his chair slowly, deliberately, the leather creaking beneath him. At 45, Dominic Cross moved with the controlled stillness of a man who had spent his entire adult life learning how to intimidate people without raising his voice. He was broad through the shoulders, his dark hair silvered at the temples, his face all hard angles and watchful eyes. When he came around the desk, the soles of his Oxfords barely whispered against the Persian rug. Elena forced herself not to step backward. "It was a kid," she said. "The boy from the corner store downstairs. I helped him pick up some candy he dropped yesterday, and this morning he gave me the rose. It was sweet. That's all." Dominic stopped directly in front of her. He was close enough that she could smell the familiar blend of tobacco and cedarwood cologne that had followed him through every room he entered. His right hand came up slowly, and she flinched before she could stop herself. But he only touched the rose, his fingers closing around the stem just beneath the blossom. "Sweet," he repeated, as if testing the word for poison. Then he twisted his wrist. The stem snapped. The petals crushed between his fingers, white fragments falling to the floor like snow. He let them drop. Elena stared at the scattered petals. Something cold settled in the pit of her stomach. "You know the rules, Elena." He brushed a fleck of white from his palm. "Nothing comes into your life that I don't put there. Not a flower. Not a gift. Not a man." His eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time since she walked in, she saw the full weight of what was burning behind them. Not anger. Something worse. Jealousy, dark and bottomless, the kind that had driven him to ruin men for far less than a flower. Before she could respond, he reached past her and pressed a small button mounted beneath the edge of his desk. Behind her, the heavy office door clicked. The lock engaged with a sound that seemed to echo through the quiet room. Elena's fingers found the hem of her blazer and held on. "Dominic, I told you." "I heard what you told me." He moved around her, circling like a shark in still water. "But I also know that a rose from a corner store kid doesn't explain why your eyes flicked toward that drawer when I asked the question." He stopped beside a row of filing cabinets, his hand resting on the top drawer. "What's in here, Elena?" Her heart dropped. "The roses. The red roses from Ryan Callahan, the young detective who had stumbled into her life 4 days ago with blood on his shirt and a story she should never have listened to." She had hidden the bouquet in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, behind a stack of old invoices, planning to throw them away when she left for the night. But Dominic was already pulling the drawer open. The red roses tumbled out, their petals loosened by the movement, a dozen crimson blooms spilling across the floor like an open wound. The room went very still. Dominic stared at the flowers at his feet. When he looked up, his expression had gone blank in a way that terrified her more than any rage ever could. "A cop," he said quietly. "A cop bought you roses." Elena's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He bent down and scooped up the bouquet with one hand, then turned and walked toward the massive aquarium built into the far wall. The fish inside, bright angelfish and a single slow-moving angelfish, scattered as he plunged the roses into the water. The stems sank, the red petals drifting apart, releasing tiny bubbles that rose to the surface like the last breath of something drowning. Ryan Callahan. Dominic's voice was flat. 32 years old. Joined the Boston Police Department 7 years ago. Transferred to the South Boston precinct last March. He's been working the docks for the past 6 weeks. He turned from the aquarium, water dripping from his fingers. "Did you think I wouldn't know?" Elena felt the floor shift beneath her. Of course he knew. Dominic knew everything that moved through his territory. He had eyes in every bar, every warehouse, every cop bar. Ryan Callahan had been a fool to think he could investigate Dominic Cross without being noticed. And she had been a bigger fool to help him. "He helped me," she whispered. "That's all. He helped me with something, and the flowers were just..." "Helped you with what?" Dominic crossed the room in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was in front of her again, his hands bracing against the wall on either side of her shoulders, caging her in. "What did a Boston cop help my woman with?" The word "my woman" hit her like a slap. 3 years, and she still flinched at it. Not because it was wrong, in every way that mattered, it was true, but because of what it cost her to hear it. "Nothing," she said. "It was nothing. I found him outside the warehouse last week. He'd been jumped. I gave him a towel and called him a cab. That's all." Dominic's jaw tightened. "And for a towel and a cab, he brings you a dozen roses." His hand came up to her chin, fingers pressing just hard enough to tilt her face toward his. "Elena, I've had men killed for looking at you the way that detective looks at you. And you're standing here telling me it's nothing?" The lie felt thin even to her. Ryan Callahan had done more than give her a towel. He had looked at her like she was someone worth saving. And in a moment of weakness, a moment she had replayed every night since, she had let him believe that maybe, somehow, she was. "Dominic, please." She hated the plea in her voice. "He's just a man who sent flowers. I was going to throw them away. I don't want them. I don't want him. I don't want anyone. Except the person who gave you the chamomile." The words landed like a blow. Elena went rigid. Her eyes flew to his, and she knew in that instant, that he had already seen. The small bouquet of chamomile, wrapped in brown paper, stuffed into the bottom of her shoulder bag. She had kept it there all day, hidden beneath her wallet and her keys and the folded receipt from lunch. She had planned to throw it away too. She had planned to throw everything away. But Dominic Cross never missed anything. "How did you?" "I had Marcus check the building's cameras the moment I saw the rose on your lapel." He pulled back just enough to reach into her bag, which she had set on the floor when she walked in. His hand emerged with the chamomile, the fragile white and yellow blooms crushed from being shoved beneath everything else. "You passed a man on the corner of D Street and L Street at 8:47 this morning. Tall. Brown hair. Leather jacket. He handed you these flowers, and you took them." His voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "Who is he?" Elena couldn't breathe. She had been so careful. 3 years of careful. 3 years of looking over her shoulder, of deleting messages, of never making eye contact with anyone who might recognize her from the life she had left behind. And in the space of 10 seconds on a street corner, all of it had unraveled. "I don't know his name," she said, and the lie was so automatic that it almost felt true. "He said he recognized me from somewhere. I took the flowers to make him go away." Dominic studied her face for a long moment. His thumb traced along her jawline, feather-light, almost tender. Then he smiled, and the smile never touched his eyes. "Marcus is pulling the footage from the traffic cameras now. He'll have a name by tonight." He let the chamomile fall to the floor, the stems breaking on impact. "But I'm going to give you one chance to tell me the truth before I find out on my own. Because you know what happens when I find out on my own." Elena closed her eyes. She thought of James Bennett. The boy she had loved when she was 22, when the world had still felt wide open and full of possibilities. The boy who had held her hand through her mother's funeral, who had whispered promises in the dark, who had told her that as long as they had each other, nothing else mattered. The boy who had run. 3 years ago, James had gotten involved with the wrong people, a crew out of Everett who had fronted him money for a business that never materialized. When the debt came due, with interest and threats and the kind of violence that didn't leave marks, James had panicked. He had called her in the middle of the night, voice shaking, telling her he had to leave. He had asked her to come with him. But there had been no money for 2 plane tickets, no time to sell the things they owned, no way to disappear together. So she had done the only thing she could think of. She had gone to Dominic Cross. She had known of Dominic only by reputation, the man who controlled the docks, the unions, the flow of goods that moved through South Boston after dark. He was the kind of man her mother had warned her about, the kind of man who solved problems with a phone call and a signature. But he was also the only person in the city who could make a debt to the Everett crew disappear. She had walked into his office with nothing but a plea and a promise. He had listened. He had made the debt vanish. And in return, he had asked for something she hadn't fully understood until it was too late. Her. Not her body, not at first. He had asked for her time, her loyalty, her presence. He had hired her as his assistant, given her an apartment, paid her more than she had ever earned. But over the months that followed, the boundaries had blurred. The late nights at the office became dinners at his home. The dinners became weekends at his house on the Cape. And somewhere along the way, she had stopped being his employee and become something else. His possession. She had tried to leave once. It had lasted 6 days. On the 7th, she had found him waiting outside her new apartment, his expression calm and patient, as if he had known all along where she was. He hadn't threatened her. He had simply said, "I told you from the beginning. You belong to me. Not because I made you that way, but because you gave yourself to me the moment you walked through my door." And the worst part, the part that still kept her awake at night, was that he was right. James had come back. After 3 years of silence, he had appeared on a street corner with a bouquet of chamomile, his eyes full of everything he had never said. And she had taken the flowers, because some part of her, the part that had never stopped being 22 and in love, had wanted to believe that maybe, somehow, the past could be rewritten. But there was no rewriting anything with Dominic Cross. "His name is James Bennett," she said, and the words felt like glass in her throat. "He's someone I used to know. He left the country 3 years ago. I didn't know he was back until this morning." Dominic's expression didn't change. "And you took flowers from a man you used to know?" She swallowed. "It was a mistake. I should have walked away. I should have thrown them in the nearest trash can. But I didn't, and I'm sorry." "Sorry." He repeated the word the way a judge might repeat a defendant's plea before delivering a sentence. Elena, I don't want your apologies. I want your loyalty. And right now, I'm looking at a woman who accepted flowers from a cop and an ex-boyfriend on the same day she wore a rose from a child. He stepped back, and the distance between them felt like a chasm. Tell me why I shouldn't have both of them killed tonight. The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Elena's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the wall behind her to steady herself. Because it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't make me more loyal. It would only prove that you're exactly the monster everyone says you are. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe, or respect, crossed Dominic's face. Then it was gone. I am the monster everyone says I am, he said quietly. The only difference is, I've never pretended to be anything else. You knew what I was when you walked through that door 3 years ago. You knew what it would cost to ask for my help. And you came anyway. He bent down and picked up a single rose petal from the floor, the red from the bouquet that now lay ruined in the aquarium. So don't stand there and act wounded when the monster behaves like a monster. He turned and walked back to his desk, settling into the leather chair with the ease of a king reclaiming his throne. The lock on the door remained engaged. The silence stretched between them, heavy and waiting. Sit down, Elena. She didn't move. I said, sit down. Her legs carried her to the chair across from his desk. She sat on the edge of the cushion, every muscle in her body coiled tight. Dominic picked up a pen from the desk and rotated it slowly between his fingers. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen now, he said. And you're going to listen, because the only reason both of those men are still breathing is that I haven't decided yet which one of them I want to make an example of. Elena's heart lurched. Dominic. Shut up. The words were quiet, but they cut through the air like a blade. The detective. Ryan Callahan. He's been poking around the docks for weeks. He's been asking questions about my business, about my people, about the shipments that move through the harbor. You think he sent you flowers because he likes your eyes, Elena? He sent you flowers because he thinks you're a way to get to me. He tossed the pen onto the desk. He's using you. And James Bennett. He said the name slowly, tasting it. Your old boyfriend. The one who left you with nothing and never looked back. He shows up on a street corner with a bouquet of chamomile and suddenly you're hiding flowers in your bag like a teenager. He shook his head. He's not using you, Elena. He's running from something. And when men run, they always run to the person they think will save them. The words landed like stones in her chest. You don't know anything about James, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. I know everything about James Bennett. Dominic reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, thick with documents. He dropped it onto the desk between them. I've known about him since the day you walked through my door. Did you think I wouldn't run a background check on the man who left you holding his debt? The man who used your name on loan applications and then disappeared across the Atlantic when things went bad? Elena stared at the folder. Her vision blurred at the edges. He didn't know, she whispered. The loans, he didn't know they were using my name. He knew. Dominic's voice was flat. He knew and he ran anyway. That's the kind of man you're protecting. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the desk. And now he's back, and he's standing on street corners handing you flowers like he has any right to even look at you. Tell me, Elena. What did he say to you this morning? She couldn't speak. Did he tell you he missed you? Did he tell you he's sorry? Did he tell you he made a mistake and he wants you back? Dominic's eyes never left her face. Because that's what men like James Bennett do. They come back when they're broke or scared or out of options. And they always tell the woman they left behind exactly what she wants to hear. A tear slid down Elena's cheek before she could catch it. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, furious at herself for showing weakness. He said he came back for me, she admitted. He said he's been thinking about me for 3 years. He said he wants to make things right. Dominic's expression didn't change. And you believed him? It wasn't a question. It was a statement, delivered with the flat certainty of a man who had seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. I don't know what I believed. The truth came out before she could stop it. I was so surprised to see him. I didn't know what to say. He put the flowers in my hand and he walked away before I could think. She looked at the chamomile scattered on the floor. I wasn't going to keep them. No, Dominic said. You were going to throw them away, just like you were going to throw away the cop's roses. And just like you were going to throw away the rose from the corner store boy. He stood up, and something in his posture had shifted. The jealous rage had settled into something colder, more calculated. But you didn't throw any of them away, Elena. You kept them. All of them. And that tells me something. What? It tells me that you're still looking for an exit. He walked around the desk and stood behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders. She felt the weight of them through her blazer, heavy and unyielding. You've been looking for an exit since the day you arrived. Maybe you don't even realize it. But every flower you accepted today was a question, Elena. Is there a life for me outside this room? Is there someone out there who sees me as more than a possession? His thumbs pressed into the muscles at the base of her neck. And I know the answer you're hoping for. I've always known. She sat frozen beneath his hands. Let me be clear, he said, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. There is no life outside this room for you, Elena. Not because I won't allow it, because you won't. You've had 3 years to run. 3 years of passwords and surveillance cameras and locked doors. And every single time you had a chance to disappear, you stayed. You stayed because some part of you knows that whatever is out there, whatever life you're imagining with your detective or your ex-boyfriend or anyone else, it will never feel as safe as this. Safe? The word burst out of her, sharp and bitter. You call this safe? You locked the door, Dominic. You're threatening to kill 2 men over flowers. You've had me followed, watched, tracked. I've had you protected, he corrected. There's a difference. You think I don't know what's out there waiting for you? You think the people you've tangled with over the last 3 years, the business partners, the rivals, the men who would love nothing more than to hurt me through you, you think they'd hesitate? His hands tightened slightly. The only reason you're still alive, Elena, is because every one of them knows what I would do if they touched you. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that his protection was just another word for control, that the walls he had built around her were no different from a prison. But the words stuck in her throat, because some part of her, the part that had survived 3 years in his world, knew that he was right. The door clicked again. Elena's head snapped toward the sound. Dominic didn't move. He had expected it. Marcus Webb stepped into the office. He was tall and lean, with the kind of face that blended into crowds, the kind of face that made him useful. He nodded once at Dominic, then glanced at Elena, his expression carefully neutral. Boss. What did you find? Marcus crossed the room and placed a tablet on the desk. The screen showed a grainy image from a traffic camera, Elena standing on a street corner, a man in a leather jacket handing her a small bouquet. The man's face was partially obscured by the angle, but it was clear enough. James Bennett. Marcus's voice was low. Returned to the US 8 days ago. Flew into Logan from London. He's been staying at a hotel in the Seaport district. No known employment, no credit activity, no contact with family. He paused. He's been asking questions about you, boss. About your business. About the Everett crew. Dominic's hand slid from Elena's shoulders. He moved around the desk and picked up the tablet, studying the image with the intensity of a man reading a death sentence. What kind of questions? About a debt. About a woman. Marcus glanced at Elena again, then away. He's looking for someone who can give him information. He's being careful, but not careful enough. The room felt like it was closing in around her. You need to let me talk to him, Elena said, and both men turned to look at her. Let me find out what he's doing here. Let me tell him to leave. I can make him understand that there's nothing for him in Boston. Dominic set the tablet down. You think you can reason with him? Elena, the man left you with a debt that would have gotten you killed if I hadn't intervened. He ran to another country and left you to clean up his mess. And now he's back, asking questions about my business, and you want to have a conversation? I want to save his life, she said, and the words came out raw. I know what you'll do to him if you find him before I do. I know what happens to men who ask questions about your business. And I know that you'll tell yourself it was justified, because he left me, because he hurt me, because he came back. But it won't be justified, Dominic. It will be murder. A long silence stretched through the office. Marcus stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the floor. Dominic regarded her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile this time, or something close to it. There it is, he said softly. There's the woman who walked into my office 3 years ago with nothing but nerve and a lie. I've been wondering where she went. Elena blinked, thrown by the shift in his tone. You're wrong about one thing, Elena. I'm not going to kill James Bennett. He moved to the window and looked out at the harbor, his hands clasped behind his back. At least, not yet. Because you're going to do exactly what you just suggested. You're going to talk to him. You're going to tell him to leave Boston, to forget he ever knew you, to forget he ever heard my name. And if he's smart, he'll get on the next flight back to London and never look back. He turned to face her. But if he's not smart, if he asks one more question, if he shows up on one more street corner, if he so much as breathes your name in the wrong company, then his life is forfeit. Do you understand? Elena nodded slowly. I need to hear you say it. I understand. Good. Dominic picked up the folder from the desk and tucked it under his arm. You'll go tonight. Marcus will give you the address. You'll have 1 hour. And when you come back, I want you to remember exactly what happened in this office today. I want you to remember the roses in the aquarium and the chamomile on the floor and the lock on the door. Because next time, Elena, there won't be a conversation. He walked toward the door, then stopped beside her. His hand came up to her face, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that felt almost like a threat. I'll know everything, he said. Every word. Every look. Every pause. So don't try to protect him. Just deliver the message and come home. He released her and walked out, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Marcus followed, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Elena sat alone in the office, surrounded by the wreckage of 3 bouquets and the heavy silence of a room that had witnessed too many of these moments. She looked at the aquarium, where the red rose petals still floated in slow circles, catching the light. She looked at the chamomile, crushed and discarded. She looked at the white petals on the floor, tiny fragments of an innocent gesture that had somehow become a crime. And then, very slowly, she began to cry. 3 years earlier, Elena had walked through those same doors with a different kind of desperation. She had been 26 years old, drowning in a debt she hadn't created, carrying the weight of a man she had loved too much to let him face the consequences of his own choices. James Bennett had been gone for 2 weeks by then, his phone disconnected, his apartment empty, his last message a text that read, "I'm so sorry. I love you. Don't come looking for me." She had tried to come after him. She had gone to the Everett crew, the men who held the loan papers with her name at the bottom. She had begged for time. They had laughed at her. One of them, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, had told her that debts didn't care about love. Debts only cared about payment. And if she couldn't pay, they would find another way to collect. She had known exactly what he meant. So she had gone to Dominic Cross. She had heard stories about him, of course. Everyone in South Boston had. He was the man who ran the docks, the unions, the quiet corners of the city where money changed hands and power was measured in favors. He was ruthless, they said. Dangerous. The kind of man who could make problems disappear with a single phone call. But he was also, according to the stories, a man who understood loyalty. She had walked into his office without an appointment, wearing a cheap dress and carrying a folder full of loan documents. She had been shaking so badly she could barely hold on to the folder. But she had made it to the center of the room, and she had opened her mouth, and she had said the only thing she could think of. "I need help. And I have nothing to offer you except my loyalty." Dominic had been sitting behind the same mahogany desk, smoking the same brand of cigar. He had looked at her for a long time, his eyes moving over her face, her hands, the tremor in her fingers. Then he had set down his cigar and folded his hands on the desk. "Loyalty," he repeated. "That's a big word. Most people who use it don't understand what it means." "I understand," she had said. "I understand that it means I do what you ask. I show up when you need me. I keep my mouth shut about what I see. And I never, ever betray you." He had smiled at that. Not a kind smile, but an interested one. "And what do you need from me, exactly?" She had told him. The debt. The Everett crew. The name on the papers. The man who had run. When she finished, Dominic had leaned back in his chair and studied her with an expression she couldn't read. "The man," he said. "James Bennett. You love him?" She had hesitated. Then she had nodded. "And he left you anyway?" Another nod. Dominic had stood and walked around his desk, stopping in front of her. He had been close enough that she could smell the smoke on his clothes. "I'll take care of the debt," he said. "Every dollar. I'll make sure the Everett crew never comes near you again." "Thank you," she had whispered. "I'll do anything." "I know you will." He had reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "But I want you to understand something before you agree. When I pay a debt, Elena, I own it. And when I take out a person, I own them too. If you accept my help, you accept that arrangement. There's no paying me back. There's no walking away when you feel like you've done enough. You belong to me until I decide otherwise. Do you understand?" She had stared at him, her heart hammering in her chest. "Say it," he had said. "I need to hear you understand." "I understand," she had whispered. "I belong to you." He had smiled then, and it was the first time she had seen his real smile, the one that softened his eyes and made him look almost human. "Good. Then welcome to my world, Elena. I hope you survive it." She had survived. Barely. The first year had been the hardest. She had learned his routines, his moods, his expectations. She had learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression that signaled approval or displeasure. She had learned which questions to ask and which ones to never voice aloud. She had also learned that Dominic Cross was not a simple monster. He was generous when it suited him, lavish gifts, expensive dinners, a wardrobe full of clothes she never would have bought for herself. He was protective in ways that felt almost tender, walking her to her car at night, checking in when she was sick, remembering the anniversary of her mother's death and sending flowers without a note. But he was also capable of cruelty that turned her blood cold. She had watched him fire a loyal employee for a minor mistake. She had listened to him order a man beaten for skimming from a shipment. She had seen the way he could end a phone call and then sit back with an expression of calm satisfaction, as if the conversation had been about nothing more than the weather. And she had learned, slowly and painfully, that his possessiveness was not a quirk but a fundamental law of his existence. The first time she had accepted a dinner invitation from a male coworker, a harmless drink after work, Dominic had appeared at the bar within 20 minutes. He hadn't made a scene. He had simply walked in, sat down beside her, and ordered a drink. The coworker had left within 10 minutes. The next day, he had been transferred to a different department. Elena never saw him again. After that, she had stopped accepting invitations. She had stopped doing a lot of things. She had stopped seeing old friends, stopped visiting the neighborhood where she had grown up, stopped checking her social media. She had become a ghost in her own life, existing only in the spaces Dominic allowed her to occupy. But she had also started paying attention to his business, to his contacts, to the names that came up in phone calls and the documents that passed through his office. She had started keeping notes, not in a notebook, not on her phone, but in her memory. Names, dates, amounts, locations. The pieces of a puzzle that, if they ever came together, could bring down an empire. She hadn't known what she would do with the information. Maybe nothing. Maybe she would carry it to her grave. But the act of collecting it had made her feel less powerless. It had given her something that belonged to her alone, a secret that Dominic Cross would never know. And then Ryan Callahan had walked into her life. She had found him outside one of the warehouses near the docks, slumped against a brick wall with blood running down his face. He had been jumped, he told her later, by men who didn't like the questions he was asking. She had helped him up, called a cab, given him a clean towel from the supply closet. She had told herself it was just basic human decency. But when he had looked at her with those clear blue eyes and asked for her name, she had felt something shift inside her. Something that had been dormant for a long time. "You should be careful around here," she had said. "The docks aren't safe at night." "I'm a cop," he had said, grinning through the blood. "It's my job to be in unsafe places." She had given him her name. She had told him she worked in one of the offices nearby. She had told him she was fine. She had told him to stay safe. And she had walked away before he could ask any more questions. But he had found her again. At the coffee shop where she bought her morning latte. At the deli where she picked up lunch. At the park where she sometimes sat during her breaks. He had always been friendly, always polite, always asking questions that she answered with half-truths and evasions. Then, 4 days ago, he had shown up at her building with a bouquet of red roses. "I wanted to thank you," he had said, holding out the flowers. "For helping me. For not walking away. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." She had taken the roses because she didn't know how to refuse without making a scene. She had thanked him, told him it was nothing, and closed the door. Then she had stared at the flowers for a long time, her heart racing with something she couldn't name. Fear, yes. But also something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The hotel in the Seaport District was one of those glass and steel buildings that had sprung up along the Boston waterfront in recent years, full of business travelers and young professionals who paid too much for rooms with water views. Elena stood outside the entrance, her phone in her hand, the address Marcus had given her glowing on the screen. She had changed out of her work clothes into something simpler, jeans, a sweater, boots. She wanted to look like a woman who was not attached to Dominic Cross. She wanted to look like the woman James Bennet remembered. The lobby was sleek and anonymous. She gave the front desk James's name, and the clerk called up without asking any questions. Then she was in the elevator, watching the numbers climb, her reflection distorted in the polished steel doors. The door opened on the 7th floor. She stepped into the hallway, her feet sinking into plush carpet. Room 712 was at the end of the hall, facing the water. She knocked before she could lose her nerve. The door swung open. James Bennet looked different than she remembered. Older, yes, but also harder. The softness around his jaw had been replaced by something leaner, more angular. His brown hair was shorter, his eyes more tired. But when he saw her, something lit up in his face that made her chest ache. "Elena," he breathed. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come." She stepped inside, and he closed the door behind her. The room was clean and impersonal, a suitcase on the bed, a laptop on the desk, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the nightstand. "You look good," he said. "You look really good. Why are you here, James?" He flinched at the flatness in her voice. "I came back for you. I told you that. I've been trying to get back to you for 3 years. 3 years." She kept her voice steady. "You were gone for 3 years. No phone calls. No letters. No messages. And now you show up with a bouquet of chamomile and say you came back for me?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I know. I know how it looks. But I had to leave, Elena. The people I owed, they would have killed me. You know that. I didn't have a choice." "You always had a choice," she said. "You just chose to run." The words hung in the air between them. James took a step toward her, then stopped. "I think about it every day. What I did to you. What I left behind. I was a coward, and I know that. But I've spent 3 years trying to make it right. I saved money. I made connections. I came back because I finally have something to offer you. I don't want anything from you, James. You used to." His voice cracked. "You used to want everything from me. We used to talk about getting married, having kids, buying a house. We used to have plans, Elena." "Plans," she repeated. "Plans that you left behind when you got on a plane and never looked back." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know about Dominic Cross." Her blood went cold. "What do you know?" "I know you've been working for him. I know he took care of the debt I left you with. I know that you've been with him." He swallowed. "I know it because I've been watching." "You've been watching me?" "I've been waiting for the right moment to approach you. I didn't want to do it too soon. I didn't want to put you in danger." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "But I need to know, Elena. Are you okay? Are you safe? Because if he's hurting you, if he's keeping you there against your will, I can help you get out." She stared at him, torn between anger and exhaustion. He had no idea what he was getting into. He had no idea what Dominic would do to him if he knew the questions James was asking. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm safe. And I need you to leave Boston." "What?" "I need you to get on a plane and go back to London, or wherever you came from, and I need you to never contact me again." She forced the words out, each one feeling like a stone. "If you stay, James, he'll kill you." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you the truth. He knows you're here. He knows about the flowers. He knows about the questions you've been asking. And if you don't leave, he will destroy you." James's face went pale. "He knows about me?" "He knows everything. He has eyes everywhere. The moment you started asking questions, you were on his radar." She took a step back toward the door. So please, James. For once in your life, do what I ask. Leave. But he shook his head. I'm not leaving. Not without you. You don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Elena. You taught me that. He moved forward, closing the distance between them. And I choose you. I've always chosen you. I was too scared to show it before, but I'm not scared anymore. I'm here. I'm ready. And I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth. What truth? The truth about how you feel about him. About me. About this life you're living. He looked at her with those brown eyes that she had once known better than her own. Do you love him, Elena? The question hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. Because she didn't know what the answer was. She had spent 3 years in Dominic's world, and in that time, she had felt 1,000 different things for him: fear, gratitude, resentment, a strange kind of loyalty that she couldn't quite explain. But love? The word didn't fit. It didn't fit the way he looked at her, the way he touched her, the way he claimed her as his own. But neither did hate. I don't know what I feel, she admitted. I haven't known for a long time. James reached for her hand, and she let him take it. His fingers were warm, familiar, and the touch sent a shock of memory through her: late nights in cheap apartments, road trips with the windows down, the feel of his hand in hers as they walked through the common on the first day of spring. Then come with me, he said. Right now. We can leave tonight. I have money. I have contacts. We can go anywhere: Mexico, Canada, somewhere in Europe. Somewhere he'll never find us. She almost laughed. You think he won't find us? You think there's anywhere in the world we could go that he wouldn't track us down? You don't know him, James. You don't know what he's capable of. I don't care. He tightened his grip on her hand. I'd rather take my chances than leave you here with him. A tear slid down her cheek. She brushed it away, angry at herself for crying. I can't. I can't leave. Not like this. Why not? Because if I leave, he'll kill you. She looked up at him, and the truth was there in her eyes, raw and painful. Not because he loves me. Because he owns me. And you don't take what belongs to Dominic Cross without paying a price. The words hung between them, ugly and unavoidable. I'm not afraid of him, James said quietly. You should be. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of a phone vibrating. James glanced at his pocket, but it wasn't his. The sound was coming from Elena's bag. She pulled out her phone. The screen displayed a single message, from a number she didn't recognize. * 1 hour is up. *. Her heart stuttered. I have to go, she said, pulling her hand free. I have to go now. Elena. Listen to me, James. She stepped toward the door, her hand on the handle. If you care about me at all, if any part of what you've said tonight is true, you'll do what I ask. You'll leave. Tonight. Get on the next flight out of Boston and don't look back. And when you're safe, when you're somewhere he can't find you, you'll forget I ever existed. I could never forget you. Then you'll remember me as the woman who saved your life. She opened the door. Goodbye, James. She walked out before he could respond, her footsteps quick and uneven on the carpet. The elevator doors opened, she stepped inside, and as they closed, she caught a glimpse of James standing in the doorway of his room, his face twisted with something that looked like grief. The doors sealed shut, and she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But even as the elevator descended, even as she walked through the lobby and out into the cold night air, she knew it wasn't over. It was never over. Not with Dominic Cross. The car was waiting for her at the corner. It was a black SUV with tinted windows, the kind that blended into the city's traffic. Marcus leaned against the driver's side door, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He opened the back door as she approached. "Mr. Cross wants to see you," he said. "Of course he does." She climbed into the back seat, and the door closed behind her with a solid thunk. The interior smelled like leather and stale coffee. Marcus got in and started the engine, and they pulled away from the curb, heading north toward the waterfront. Elena stared out the window, watching the city slide past. The seaport's glass towers gave way to the older brick buildings of South Boston, their windows glowing yellow in the dark. She had grown up in these streets. She had walked them as a child with her mother, as a teenager with her friends, as a young woman with James. They had always felt like home. Now they just felt like a cage. The SUV turned onto a narrow street near the docks and stopped outside a warehouse that looked abandoned from the outside. But Elena knew better. This was one of Dominic's properties, a front for the operations that couldn't be run from an office building. Marcus opened the door, and she stepped out into the cold. The smell of salt and diesel hung in the air, sharp and familiar. She followed him through a side entrance, down a concrete corridor, and into a room that she had never seen before. It was larger than Dominic's office, but emptier. A single table stood in the center, with two chairs facing each other. A row of overhead lights cast the room in harsh white, making the shadows disappear. And in one corner, barely visible, stood a man she didn't recognize, broad, bald, with the kind of shoulders that spoke of manual labor and violence. Dominic was standing by the table, his back to her. He was wearing a dark overcoat, and his hands were clasped behind him. "Thank you, Marcus," he said without turning. "Wait outside." Marcus nodded and left. The door clicked shut behind him. Elena stood just inside the room, her hands at her sides. The silence stretched, heavy and waiting. "Sit down, Elena." She didn't move. "What is this place?" Dominic turned. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a darkness that made her pulse quicken. "This is where I bring people who have disappointed me." He gestured to the chair. "Sit." She walked forward and sat down. The chair was cold beneath her. The bald man in the corner shifted his weight, and she realized with a jolt that she recognized him now. His name was Nikolai. He was one of Dominic's enforcers, the kind of man who didn't ask questions, just followed orders. Dominic settled into the chair across from her. "I know everything," he said quietly. "Marcus had the room wired. I heard every word you said to James Bennett." Elena's stomach dropped. "You had the room wired?" "I told you, Elena. I'll know everything." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "So let's talk about the things you didn't say." She felt like the floor was falling away beneath her. "He asked you if you loved him," Dominic continued. "And you said you didn't know. He asked you to leave with him, and you refused. He begged you to come back to him, and you walked away." His eyes narrowed. "Why?" She stared at him, trying to read his expression. "Because I know what would happen if I didn't." "Is that the only reason? What else would there be?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked around the table, stopping behind her chair. She felt his hands settle on her shoulders, the same gesture he had used in his office, but this time it felt different. Heavier. More final. 3 years ago, you came to me because you had no one else. You were desperate. You were broken. And I saved you." His voice was low, almost gentle. "I didn't have to. I could have turned you away. But I didn't. I took you in, and I protected you, and I gave you a life that most people would kill for." His fingers tightened slightly. And in all that time, Elena, I have never once asked you to love me. Her breath caught. I've never needed you to love me. Love is for people who have the luxury of choice. We don't have that, you and I. What we have is something else. He moved around to face her, crouching down so that his eyes were level with hers. What we have is loyalty. What we have is obligation. What we have is a bond that can't be broken by flowers or pretty words or the memory of a man who abandoned you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single item, a white rose, identical to the one he had crushed in his office. He held it up between them. Today, you accepted flowers from 3 different men. A child who doesn't know any better. A cop who's using you to get to me. And an ex-boyfriend who left you to die. He twirled the rose between his fingers. But not one of them gave you what I've given you. Not one of them stood by you when you had nothing. Not one of them would die for you the way I would kill for you. He placed the rose on the table between them. I'm not going to kill James Bennett, he said. Not tonight. Not because he deserves to live, but because killing him would hurt you, and I don't want to hurt you, Elena. I want you to understand. She looked at him, her heart pounding. Understand what? That there is no version of your life that doesn't include me. He stood, his shadow falling over her. You think you're trapped. You think I built a cage around you and thrown away the key. But the truth is, you've had the key the whole time. You've just been too afraid to use it. He turned and walked toward the door, then stopped. James Bennett will receive a message tonight. It will be polite. It will be clear. And if he's smart, he'll be on a plane by morning. He looked back at her. If he's not, well. You know what happens to people who aren't smart. The door opened, and he was gone. Elena sat alone in the room, staring at the white rose on the table. The overhead lights hummed overhead, casting everything in sharp relief. Nikolai had left with Dominic, and the room was empty except for her. She picked up the rose. It was fresh, the petals soft and unblemished. She brought it to her nose, but there was no scent. Dominic had chosen it because it was beautiful and meaningless, a symbol of his power, not of his affection. But as she looked at it, she realized that Dominic was wrong about one thing. She did have a choice. She had always had a choice. She had just been too afraid to see it. She stood up, still holding the rose, and walked out of the warehouse into the cold night air. The sky was clear, the stars visible above the city's light pollution. She looked up at them for a long moment, feeling the weight of 3 years pressing down on her chest. And then she made a decision. The next morning, Elena walked into Dominic's office and placed a file on his desk. Dominic looked up from his coffee, his eyebrow raised. What's this? 3 years of notes, she said. Names. Dates. Transactions. Every piece of information I've gathered since the day I walked through that door. Names of your partners, your enemies, your silent investors. The offshore accounts. The shell companies. The shipments that moved through the harbor last spring. She kept her voice steady. Enough to bring down half of your operation and put you in federal prison for the rest of your life. Dominic's expression didn't change. He picked up the file and flipped through it slowly, his eyes scanning the pages. You've been keeping this for 3 years? Since the first time I watched you have a man beaten for asking the wrong question. He set the file down. And now you're giving it to me. Why? Because I want a trade. She walked to the window and looked out at the harbor. I want you to leave James alone. Not just tonight. Forever. I want you to sign a document that says you'll never touch him, never have him touched, never let anyone else touch him. And I want the same protection for Detective Callahan. Dominic laughed, a short, sharp sound. You're negotiating with me? With a file full of my own crimes? It's not just your crimes, Dominic. It's proof. Names, dates, account numbers. Things that would take the FBI years to find on their own. Things that would make you the biggest organized crime bust in New England history. She turned to face him. I'm not asking for my freedom. I know I can't have that. I'm asking for theirs. The silence stretched. Then Dominic stood, and something in his posture had changed. He walked around the desk toward her, and for a moment she thought he was going to hurt her. But he stopped in front of her, his hands at his sides, his eyes searching her face. You kept these notes for 3 years, he said quietly. And in all that time, you never used them. You never went to the police. You never contacted the FBI. You never sold the information to a rival. He tilted his head. Why? She didn't answer. Why, Elena? Because I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid of what you would do. Afraid of what would happen to the people I care about. Afraid that even if I turned you in, you would find a way to hurt me. She paused. But I'm not afraid anymore. His eyes narrowed. What changed? You made me understand something last night. She met his gaze without flinching. You said I've had the key the whole time. And you were right. I just wasn't ready to use it. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. There she is, he murmured. The woman who walked into my office with nothing but nerve and a lie. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing along her jawline. You're magnificent when you stop pretending to be afraid. She pulled back, and his hand fell away. Give me the guarantee, she said. In writing. James and Ryan are off limits. Forever. And what do I get in return? The file. And my continued loyalty. And. She hesitated, then said what she had come to say. A promise. That I will never use what I know against you. Not as long as you keep your word. Dominic considered her for a long moment. Then he walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a legal pad. He wrote for several minutes, his pen moving across the paper in quick, decisive strokes. When he finished, he tore off the page and handed it to her. It was a signed statement, witnessed by no one, with no legal standing. It was a piece of paper with a promise written on it. But in Dominic's world, a promise was worth more than a contract. Will that satisfy you? He asked. Elena read the words, simple, clear, direct. I, Dominic Cross, agree to never harm, order harm, or allow harm to come to James Bennett or Ryan Callahan, directly or indirectly, for any reason, from this day forward. She folded the paper and tucked it into her bag. It's a start, she said. Dominic nodded. And the file? She walked to the desk and picked up the folder. But instead of handing it to him, she held it up and tore it in half, then in half again. She dropped the pieces into the trash can beside his desk. I don't need it anymore, she said. He watched her with an expression she couldn't read. That was your only leverage. Now you have nothing. No, she said. I have something better. I have the truth. She walked toward the door, then stopped. And I have your word. Which, in your world, means more than any file. She opened the door and walked out, leaving him standing alone in the office. 2 days later, Elena received a text from Ryan Callahan. I'm being transferred. Effective immediately. Is this your doing? She smiled and typed back, stay safe, detective. Then she deleted the thread. That evening, she stood at the window of her apartment, watching the city lights flicker on in the dusk. The apartment was quiet, but not the kind of quiet she used to dread. This quiet felt different. Lighter. Almost peaceful. She heard footsteps behind her, and then Dominic's arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I bought you something," he said, his voice low in her ear. "Another rose?" "Better." He turned her around and placed a small velvet box in her hands. She opened it slowly, her breath catching when she saw what was inside. It was a key. "Not a cage," he said. "A house. In the Berkshires. Somewhere you can go when the city feels too heavy." He touched her face. "You said you wanted the truth, Elena. Here it is. I don't want to own you anymore. I want to keep you. And there's a difference." She looked at the key, then at him. "Is there?" she asked. He smiled, a real smile, the one that softened his eyes. "Ask me again in a year." The city outside the window was alive with sound and light and the endless movement of people living their lives. And in that moment, standing in the arms of a man who had once been her captor and was now something else entirely, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. She felt like she was finally standing on solid ground. Maybe the ground was still inside a world she had never chosen. Maybe the walls were still there, just further away. But for the first time, she could see a door. And the door was open. And that, she realized, was enough.